"You don't belong in this room, Mr. Calloway. Go back to your garage." She said it the way people say things they have practiced until they no longer feel them. Priscilla Dent, Chief Acquisitions Officer of Dent Harlow Development, did not look up from her folder when she said it. The other three people at the conference table looked at the table. Seth Calloway stood in the doorway of the 14th floor conference room in Raleigh with a work shirt that still had grease under the collar from the morning shift and a bid proposal in a manila envelope. He had driven 2 hours. He did not answer. He set the envelope on the credenza inside the door because that was the only surface within reach, and he left. In the elevator going down, he pressed the button for the parking garage. The door closed. The floor numbers changed. He watched them change. He drove north on I-40 and stopped at a gas station in Hillsborough to get Marigold a juice box because he had promised. And he never stopped promising things he had said he would do. She was in the after-school program at Cedar Brook Elementary. She came out with her sneakers untied and a paper butterfly she had made in art pinned to her backpack strap. She climbed into the truck. "Did you bring it?" He handed her the juice box. She punctured it with the straw without looking and drank half of it before she looked out the window. "How was the trip?" "Long," he said. "Did the people like what you brought?" "Not today." She accepted this the way she accepted most things, quietly, without pressing. She had his mouth, the way it stayed flat when something landed wrong. She had her mother's eyes. He did not think about that while he was driving. He thought about it later in the kitchen when she wasn't looking. His shop was on Millbrook Road, a concrete block building with a hand-painted sign that said Calloway Auto and Fabrication. He had run it for 11 years. His brother Clem had painted the sign and spelled fabrication wrong the first time and had to do it again. The second version was slightly darker than the first, and you could still see the ghost of the wrong letters underneath if the morning light hit it right. Calloway had never repainted it. He kept meaning to. He kept not doing it. He had started the shop at 26 with a small business loan and a used MIG welder and the habit of sleeping 4 hours a night. Now he had 6 bays, 4 employees, a contract with a county school bus fleet, and a proposal he had driven 2 hours to deliver to a woman who had not looked at it. His daughter was 7. His wife, Jess, had been gone 3 years. He did not say gone. He said lost. She had been lost to a driver who ran a red light on a Tuesday in October on a road she drove every single day. He did not tell people this. He answered questions when they were asked, and otherwise he went to work. That evening, Clem came over with a bag of groceries, because Clem came over with groceries on Wednesdays, the way he had come over with groceries every Wednesday since the October that everything changed. Clem was 41 and worked dispatch at the county EMS station and believed that a girl Marigold's age needed more than one adult at the table. He sat across from her and cut his pork chop into squares and asked her about the butterfly. "It's for the science fair, but also just because," she said. "Can butterflies be for just because? Everything can be for just because." Clem looked at Seth over his plate. Seth was eating. He did not look up. "How'd Raleigh go?" "It didn't. They look at the numbers. She told me to go back to my garage." Clem chewed slowly. He set his fork down. He picked it up again. "You're not going to fight that? I submitted the bid. That's the fight. That's not the same fight." Seth did not answer. He slid another piece of pork chop onto Marigold's plate. She looked at it and then at him and then ate it without comment. After Marigold was in bed and Clem had gone home, Seth sat at the kitchen table with the county contract folder open in front of him and a pencil he was not using. The house was quiet the way it was always quiet after 8. He had gotten used to the kind of quiet that has a shape. This quiet had the shape of all the things Jess would have said if she had been at the table. She would have told him to call the city councilman. She would have told him to pull the public procurement records. She would have told him the exact thing he already knew and had not done because doing it would have meant wanting something for himself. And since October 3 years ago, he had stopped knowing how to want things for himself. He closed the folder. He turned off the kitchen light. He stood in Marigold's doorway for a minute and looked at her in the dark. The paper butterfly was on her nightstand under the small lamp she kept on low. He listened to her breathe. Then he went to bed. Priscilla Dent drove home from the 14th floor at 6:45 and ate a salad she had ordered ahead and did not think about Seth Calloway or his manila envelope. She thought about the Millbrook corridor proposal, which was due to the city planning board in 3 weeks and which she had been assembling for 2 years. She thought about parcels and square footage, and soil remediation timelines. She had learned these things from her father Hugh Dent, who had built Dent Harlow from a 3-person operation into a mid-size commercial developer with 11 active projects in the research triangle. She had learned to move fast and cut the edges that slowed you down. The man in the garage shirt with grease under his collar had been an edge. She had cut it. She slept well. The next morning, a Tuesday, a dark blue government SUV with federal plates turned into the Millbrook Road block at 9:15 and parked in front of Callaway Auto and Fabrication. The woman who stepped out wore a gray suit and carried nothing in her hands. Behind her, a man in a Department of Defense field jacket scanned the lot before he nodded and stepped aside. Seth was under a school bus chassis. He heard the shoes on the concrete and rolled out on the creeper. The woman was looking at the framed certifications on the wall beside the tool bench. She turned when she heard him. "Mr. Callaway, I'm Deputy Director Anita Brower, Office of Defense Procurement, Southeastern Region. I apologize for arriving without an appointment." He stood up. He did not wipe his hands. He looked at her. "I have an appointment," he said. "Bus fleet 9:30. I'll be brief." She did not sit. She spoke the way people speak when they have thought about what they are going to say and decided on the cleanest version. "We are assembling a regional vehicle maintenance and structural fabrication contract under the DoD Civilian Infrastructure Support Program. 12 bases in the Southeast. Armored vehicle chassis inspection, school and transport fleet maintenance for base-dependent communities, light structural fabrication. Your shop is one of 4 facilities in North Carolina with the combination of chassis certification, structural fabrication capacity, and security clearance on file that qualify for this tier." Seth looked at her. "I have a clearance on file?" "You do, from your time with the 249th Engineering Battalion." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the school bus parked in Bay 3. "That was 12 years ago. Clearances don't expire the same way skills do, Mr. Callaway." She took a card from her jacket pocket and held it out. "I'm not here to make a decision today. I'm here because this kind of contract deserves a face-to-face, not a portal submission." He took the card. He read it. He set it on the tool bench beside the socket set. "Thank you, Deputy Director. One more thing." She paused in a way that was deliberate. "The 249th commander in your final funnel deployment was Colonel James Weir. He is now Chief of Staff for Army Material Command. He asked me to tell you he remembers the bridge at Coast." Seth did not answer. He looked at the floor for a moment the way a man looks at something that is not on the floor. "Tell him I remember it too," he said. She nodded. She walked out. Seth stood in the middle of the shop floor for a long moment after the government SUV pulled away. One of his mechanics, a young man named Porter, was watching from the door of Bay 2. "Everything okay, boss? Get the bus in," Seth said. He went back to work. Priscilla Dent was in her office reviewing soil remediation bids when her father called. "Did you reject a bid from a fabricator on Millbrook Road last week?" She swiveled slightly in her chair. "I rejected several bids, Callaway Auto and Fabrication, yes. Out of scope, no commercial development experience." There was a pause on the line. Hugh Dent did not pause the way other people paused. His pauses meant something had occurred to him that he was deciding whether to say. "Priscilla, that man welded the reinforcing frame on the parking structure at our Garner project in 2019. It passed every inspection and came in 8% under estimate." She was quiet. "He subcontracted through Harmon Steel. You wouldn't have seen his name in the chain. But I did, because I asked who did the work when the inspector told me it was the cleanest weld joint he'd seen in 20 years on Triangle commercial builds." She looked at the soil remediation numbers on her screen without seeing them. "He didn't disclose that. He submitted a bid, Priscilla. He didn't come to perform." She did not answer. "The Millbrook Corridor proposal needs a fabrication partner for the transit infrastructure component. 2 other firms have already declined because of the timeline. I suggest you pull his envelope off that credenza." He hung up. Hugh Dent ended calls the way he ended meetings. She sat for a moment. Then she called her assistant and asked her to retrieve the envelope from the 14th floor conference room credenza. The envelope was still there. The proposal was 41 pages. She read it that afternoon. It was meticulous. The numbers were clean. The timeline was aggressive and had backup assumptions built into every phase. There was a section on personnel that listed each of his certified technicians by name with their years of experience and their specific certification codes. There was a note at the bottom of the last page, handwritten, that said, "I build things that hold." That is the only promise I make." She drove to Millbrook Road the next morning. She did not call ahead. The shop was open. A radio was on somewhere in the back. She walked in and found Seth at the fabrication bench welding a bracket assembly. He shut the torch off when he saw her and lifted his helmet. He looked at her without expression. She had the proposal in her hand. "I owe you a conversation, Mr. Calloway. I did not look at this before I dismissed you." He looked at the proposal. He looked at her. "What changed? My father, and the work you did on the Garner parking structure." He said nothing for a moment. He set the helmet on the bench. "You want the Millbrook Transit component. I want to know if you're willing to discuss it after what happened in that conference room." He picked up a clean rag and folded it in half. He wiped down the edge of the bench. He did this slowly, the way he did most things, not stalling, just finishing. "I'm willing to discuss it," he said. "Not in a conference room. Here is fine." He pulled 2 stools from under the bench and set them out. She sat. He sat. They talked for an hour about load specs and fabrication timelines and transit infrastructure tolerances. She took notes on her phone. He drew dimensions on a scrap of brown paper with a carpenter's pencil. By the end of the hour, the brown paper was covered on both sides. When she stood to leave, she noticed the framed photograph on the wall above the certifications. A younger Seth Calloway in Army combat uniform standing with a crew of soldiers beside a complete bridge structure in rocky terrain. She looked at it for a moment. "Afghanistan?" she asked. "Coast Province, 2011. She did not ask more. She gathered her notebook and her bag. "Mr. Calloway." She paused at the door. "I should not have said what I said. In that room, I am saying so to your face because that is the only way it means anything." He looked at her. He nodded once. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement, which was the only thing she had earned. She left. He went back to the bench. That evening, after the shop was locked and Marigold was doing her homework at the kitchen table with her tongue between her teeth, the way she always did math, Seth's phone rang. The number was a Washington area code he did not recognize. "Mr. Calloway, this is Colonel James Weir." The voice was level and dry and sounded like a man who had given orders in loud places for a long time. "Deputy Director Brower tells me you took her card." "Yes, sir. I'm going to be in Raleigh Thursday for a briefing at Camp Butner. I would like to buy you a cup of coffee, not to discuss the contract, to say something to you directly." Seth looked at Marigold across the table. She was erasing something with great concentration. "What time?" he said. They met at a diner on Fayetteville Road at 7 in the morning. Weir was already there in civilian clothes, which did not make him look civilian. He stood when Seth came through the door and shook his hand with both of his. They sat. Weir ordered black coffee. Seth ordered the same. Weir looked at him for a moment before he spoke. "Coast Bridge held under 3 combat loads in the 6 months after we left. The Army Corps later used your joint design as a field reference for rapid construct spans in similar terrain. That document has your name on it. A lot of soldiers got home on that bridge, Calloway." Seth held his coffee cup. He did not answer. "I know what you came back to," Weir said. "And I know what you lost after." He paused. "Jess, I heard. I am sorry I did not say so at the time." The diner was quiet. A couple near the window were eating eggs and not talking. The cook scraped a griddle in the back. "The Dode contract is real," Weir said, "and it would be good for your shop. But I came here because I owed you a conversation that I should have had 3 years ago when I heard. Some debts you pay in person." Seth set his coffee down. He looked out the window at the parking lot. A man was loading groceries into a pickup. He took his time. "She would have told me to take the contract," he said. "She would have already called your office." Weir smiled. It was a small smile. "She sounds like she was something. She was everything efficient. And also everything else." He picked his coffee back up. "I'll take the meeting, Colonel." "Good." They sat for another 20 minutes. They did not talk about Coast. They did not need to. Priscilla Dent did not hear about the diner meeting. She would not have expected to. She drove to Millbrook Road twice in the following week, once with her structural engineer and once alone. The second time alone, she arrived early and sat in her car for a moment before she went in. She did not know exactly why she had come alone the second time. She told herself it was to follow up on the soil compaction question. She told herself that until she was at the door and he looked up from the school bus he was working on and said, "The compaction numbers came in. They're fine." And she realized she had not mentioned the compaction question to him yet. Marigold was in the shop office that day doing homework at the small desk in the corner. She had a thermos of chocolate milk and a worksheet with fractions on it. When Priscilla came in, Marigold looked at her the way children look at adults they are filing away for future reference. "Are you the lady from the building downtown?" she said. Priscilla stopped. "I am." Daddy came home quiet that day. Priscilla stood with her folder in her hand. "I know. He doesn't say when things are bad, he just gets quiet. That seems like a good way to handle things." Marigold considered this. "It's not always good for me because then I don't know what happened." Priscilla looked at her for a moment. "That's a fair point," she said. Marigold went back to her fractions. That night, Priscilla sat at her kitchen counter with the Millbrook proposal open in front of her and the structural notes from the afternoon visit beside it. She read for an hour. She made 2 calls. She looked out the window at the streetlight on her block for a long time before she went to bed. She did not understand entirely what she was doing. She understood that she had started doing it. The DUD preliminary contract meeting was on a Friday morning at Camp Butner. Seth drove up alone. The meeting ran 4 hours and covered scope, timeline, security protocol, and a facility inspection checklist that his shop would need to meet within 90 days. He took notes by hand. He asked 8 questions. The contracting officer told him afterward quietly that the other 3 candidate shops had each asked 1 or 2. On the drive home, he called Clem. "Put the word out, we're hiring. 1 chassis cert and 1 structural weld. Minimum 5 years each." Clem was quiet for a beat. "Something came through? Something is coming through. The garage?" "The garage," Seth said. 2 weeks before the city planning board meeting on the Millbrook corridor proposal, a man named Boyd Fitch requested a postponement of the vote on procedural grounds and was denied. Boyd Fitch sat on the planning board and had recused himself from the vote in writing 4 days earlier. He spoke now as a private citizen presenting a community impact statement. His impact statement cited traffic modeling that Priscilla's traffic engineer later identified as drawn from a 2017 study of an unrelated corridor on the south side of the city. Fitch had not updated the numbers. He had not disclosed the source. He had, however, co-signed a letter of support for a competing development proposal on the same corridor 18 months earlier. A letter that Priscilla found in the public record at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday after she had finished her own preparation and started looking because something about his timing felt wrong. She called her father at 11:30. "Dad, Boyd Fitch presented a community impact statement using a 2017 traffic study from a different project. He also co-signed a support letter for Meridian Group's competing proposal on that same corridor in 2019. Hugh Dent was quiet. "When did you find the letter?" "An hour ago." "How did you find it?" "I went looking." Another pause. "The vote is in 2 weeks." "I know. What do you need?" "I need to know if the Meridian Group proposal ever disclosed Fitch's name as a supporter in their planning submissions. I'll make a call in the morning. I'm sorry for calling at this hour, Priscilla." He paused. "Don't apologize for doing the work." She hung up. She poured a glass of water. She stood at the counter and thought about the fractions worksheet on the office desk in the shop on Millbrook Road and the small voice that had said her father gets quiet when things are bad. She thought about the photograph above the certifications, the bridge, the crew, the rocky ground. She went to the shop the next morning with a printed copy of the Fitch letter and the 2017 traffic study. She spread them on Seth's workbench. He read the letter. He read the study. He read them without hurrying. "How long have you known about Fitch?" "Since last night. What are you going to do?" "Go to the board." "But the Millbrook proposal needs a full presentation. The transit infrastructure component needs to be in the room." He looked at the papers. "You want me there. I want your proposal to be there. And I want you to speak to the fabrication scope if they ask." He folded the traffic study and handed it back to her. "I'll be there." The planning board chamber was a long room with fluorescent lights and cloth seats that had been the same green since the late 90s. Seth sat in the 3rd row in dark slacks and a collared shirt. Priscilla sat 2 seats down. Clem had come and was in the back. He had not told Seth he was coming. Seth noticed him when he walked in and did not say anything, and Clem did not say anything, and that was how they handled most things. Boyd Fitch spoke from the public comment podium. He was careful and moderate and practiced. He mentioned community values and traffic burden and the character of the neighborhood. When Priscilla's turn came, she walked to the podium and set her folder down and spoke without reading from it. She made 4 points. First, the project met or exceeded every environmental and traffic impact threshold the board's own guidelines required. Second, the transit infrastructure component had been independently reviewed by the state DOT office and cleared. Third, the community impact statement Mr. Fitch had presented used traffic data from a 2017 study of an unrelated corridor. She held up the source document. Fourth, Mr. Fitch had co-signed a letter of support for a competing project on this same corridor in 2019, and that relationship had not been disclosed in his board recusal filing. A murmur moved through the room. Fitch leaned to the microphone beside his seat. His voice was still practiced. Mrs. Dent represents a commercial developer with obvious financial interest in this outcome. Her characterization of my community statement is self-serving. The room held for a moment in the back. Clem straightened in his seat. Deputy Director Brower, who had arrived quietly and taken a seat along the wall, did not move. Seth stood up. He did not approach the microphone for a moment. When he spoke from where he was, with his hands resting on the back of the bench in front of him. My name is Seth Calloway. I own Calloway Auto and Fabrication on Millbrook Road. I'm the transit infrastructure partner on this proposal. He paused. I served 12 years in the Army Corps of Engineers. I built structures that had to hold. You don't get to argue about whether they held after the fact. They either hold or they don't. He looked toward Fitch. The data in your community statement doesn't hold. The disclosure you didn't make doesn't hold. I know what it looks like when someone builds something they don't intend to stand behind. I've seen what happens when they do it in places where the stakes are higher than a planning vote. He looked down at his hands, then up again. His voice did not change, but it dropped a half step. My daughter is 7 years old. She is going to grow up in this city. She needs transit infrastructure that was built by people who cared whether it held. That's the only reason I'm standing here. That, and because my wife would have been very loud about this if she were still able to be. The chamber was quiet. The planning board voted to approve the Millbrook Corridor proposal and to open an ethics inquiry into Boyd Fitch's undisclosed conflict. The inquiry was announced the following Wednesday. Fitch resigned from the board before the weekend. The statement said health considerations. The Raleigh Observer ran the story with the Meridian Group connection laid out in a single clean timeline. Several readers wrote letters. The morning after the vote, Seth opened the shop at 6:30. The fog off the Neuse was still on the lower road. He had the coffee going and was reviewing the DO'd facility checklist when headlights swept the bay window. Priscilla parked behind the truck. She did not know why she had come before 8. She came anyway. He was at the bench with the checklist and a mug. He looked up when she came through the bay door. He poured a second mug from the pot on the filing cabinet and held it out. She took it. They stood at the bench and did not speak for a while. The shop was cool. The mug was warm. Outside, Porter's truck pulled into the lot. Seth raised 2 fingers toward the bay window without turning his head, and Porter nodded and went to bay 2 and did not come into the office. The ethics filing goes to the city clerk today, she said. I know. My father wants to bring you into the Garner East project as the primary fabrication partner. Not subcontracted. Primary. He was quiet. He turned the checklist over on the bench. That's a different conversation, he said. That's a sit-down conversation. Yes, next week. That works. She held the mug in both hands. She looked out the bay window at the morning. Porter was under a sedan in bay 2. The shop smell was oil and metal and old concrete. It was not a smell she had grown up around. She was not sure when she had stopped noticing it. Marigold came in from the back office at 7:15 in her school clothes with her backpack on and the paper butterfly clipped to the outside. She stopped when she saw Priscilla. You're here early, she said. I had something to drop off. Marigold looked around. What did you drop off? There was a pause. Priscilla looked at Seth. Seth looked at his daughter. Coffee, Priscilla said. Marigold considered this seriously. Then she went to her father and leaned against his arm the way she leaned every morning before school. He put his hand on top of her head without looking down. She stayed for a moment. Then she straightened up and looked at Priscilla. Daddy built the bridge at my school, she said. The one over the creek. He built it when I was a baby. I know, Priscilla said. I've seen his work. Marigold nodded, satisfied. She went back to the office for her lunch bag and came out and went out the bay door to wait by the truck. Seth set his mug down and got his keys. You're going to be here when I get back? He said. I have a 9 o'clock in Raleigh. I know, I meant after. She looked at him. He was already at the door, keys in hand, face turned slightly toward the truck where Marigold was waiting. He was not looking at her. He was asking anyway. After, she said. He nodded. He went out. She stood at the bench with the mug and the checklist, and the shop smell and the sound of the truck pulling out of the lot. She was not sure what she was doing. She was sure she had started doing it. 6 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in September, when the light through the pines had turned the slow gold that comes before the leaves go, Marigold asked Priscilla to come with her to the greenway behind the elementary school where the creek ran under the bridge her father had built. Seth stood at the truck at the trailhead parking lot and watched them walk ahead. Marigold had her boots on. Priscilla had her boots on too, which she had not owned in February and had bought in April and had not told anyone about. The bridge was a simple span in pressure-treated timber with cable rails and non-slip grating, clean corners, level deck. The kind of construction that does not call attention to itself because there is nothing wrong to notice. Marigold stopped in the middle of it and looked down at the creek. "Daddy says a bridge is only good if you forget it's there," she said. "That sounds right," Priscilla said. "Because if you're thinking about the bridge, you're worried about the bridge. But if you're thinking about where you're going, then the bridge did its job." Priscilla looked at her. "Did he say that or did you?" Marigold thought about it. "He said the first part. I did the second part." She crouched down and looked through the cable rails at the water below. A stick was moving downstream. "Mom would have liked it here," she said. She liked water. She said it plainly. Not to anyone in particular. She stood back up and watched the stick until it went around the bend. Priscilla did not answer. There was no answer that belonged there. She stood beside her on the bridge and watched the water. At the truck, Seth watched them from a distance. He did not move. He had one hand on the bed rail. The angle of his shoulders was not the angle they usually held. He noticed. He did not move his hand or change his stance. He simply stood there for a while, watching his daughter stand on a bridge that was holding. That night, after Marigold was asleep and the dishes were done, Seth stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the photograph he kept on the windowsill above the sink. Jess at the coast the year before Marigold, squinting into the sun with her hand over her eyes and her hair completely wrong from the wind. She was laughing at whoever was taking the picture. She had been laughing at something for most of the photographs he had of her. He did not pray. He did not speak. He stood for a while with his hands folded and looked at her. Then he turned off the kitchen light. In the morning, he went back to work. He drove to Fleet Forces on Tuesdays. He kept the shop the rest of the week. The D-UD contract was signed on the 1st of the month. The Millbrook corridor broke ground on a Thursday. Priscilla was there in her work boots and her sight helmet. Seth was there with Porter and the new structural welder, a woman named Reyes, who had 12 years of bridge work and had asked 3 sharp questions in her interview that Porter was still thinking about. The groundbreaking was not covered by the paper. It was a Thursday morning in October and the light was low and the air smelled like cut clay. Someone brought coffee in a cardboard carrier. The project engineer said a few words. No one made a speech. The machinery started and the morning went on. Priscilla stood beside Seth at the back of the site while the first machine moved earth. "Your father would have liked this," she said. "He looked out at the work. He built things to last too. He just used different materials." She was quiet for a moment. The machine made its first pass. "What was his best one?" Seth pointed north toward the edge of the property where the road curved. "There's a drainage culvert under that turn, concrete and river stone. He built it in 1987. Every contractor who's pulled a permit on this road since then has seen it in the survey and left it alone because it's still the best engineered thing in the ground." She looked at the turn in the road. "He sounds like a man who built things that held." "He did," Seth said. "I wrote that line in the proposal for him." She looked at him. He was looking at the work. He did not look at her, but the corner of his mouth moved, just barely. The way something moves when it has been still for a very long time. She looked back at the work too. The morning went on. The machine moved another pass. Somewhere above them a hawk crossed the site in a wide, slow arc, riding the heat off the clay, and then it was gone over the tree line, and the sky where it had been was very wide and blue and did not stop.